Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Lovell, Chief of Staff, Acting, Barbados Defense Force. Commander Mark Peterson, Staff Advisor to the Chief of Staff, the Barbados Defense Force. Commander David Dorridge, Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps. Major Julia Dabrio, Commanding Officer, Barbados Regiment. Lieutenant Commander Graham Rochford, Commanding Officer, Acting, the Barbados Coast Guard. Major Alfred Taylor, Cadet Executive Officer, Barbados Cadet Corps. Former Commandants and CEOs of the Barbados Cadet Corps, the Reverend Esther Willoughby, Chaplain of the Barbados Defense Force. Representatives from the National Youth Organization, representatives from the Barbados Legion, representatives from the Ex-Cadets Association, officers, warrant officers, enlisted ranks both serving and retired, other specially invited guests, cadets, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Lieutenant Coast Guard Crispin Hackett, your Master of Ceremonies for this evening's proceedings, and it gives me great pleasure to be here on this occasion as we, this year, commemorate our 45th anniversary of existence of the Barbados Defense Force. Giving thanks, of course, and praise is important, and so at this time we give way to the Barbados Defense Force's chaplain to move the invocation, Reverend Esther Willoughby.
A pleasant good evening to all. Grace, peace, and mercy be unto you. Let us stand for prayer. Let's bow our heads. Almighty and gracious God, we stand to join our hearts in prayer in acknowledging you as the only wise God who is immortal and invisible, a great God. We give you heartfelt thanks for the Barbados Cadet Corps, which has reached the great milestone of 120 years not out. What a great blessing. Lord, we are cognizant of the fact that this organization has touched, is touching, and will continue to touch the lives of many people. We give you thanks for its valuable contribution to the national youth development in our country. Lord, may this organization continue to be a shining light which can be achieved with confidence, composure, fully aware that putting total trust in you, its foundation will never be shaken or removed. We all realize that there are many challenges and problems which are beyond the measure of man's best wisdom. We pray for our cadets, especially those who recently attended various camps. We pray for your special blessings will rest upon them, and may they shun the very appearance of evil which may cross their paths. Continue to bless the Commandant, Commander David Dorridge, Cadet Executive Officer, Major Alfred Taylor, and all officers of the Barbados Cadet Corps. Refresh them in mind, soul, and body. Renew their vision, enabling them to face whatever comes their way. We ask your special blessing on the Barbados Defense Force, celebrating its 45th anniversary, which you continue to help and bless them. And this organization continues to give unswerving support to the Barbados Cadet Corps. Lord, we thank you for the Barbados Defense Force. And now, Lord, imbue our hearts with your love. Bless our guest speaker, Colonel Errol Brathwaite, Commandant, Cayman Islands Cadet Corps, with your wisdom, so that tonight's presentation will be enriching and enlightening. Bless all those who are gathered here this evening, and may your abiding love, your grace, your peace be with us now and forevermore. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Willoughby. Now, I know you're probably wondering about the selection that you're hearing in the background, but wonder no more, because we're going to take you back to the year of 1988. The gentleman who is known as David Rudder, hailing from the Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And this song in particular was based off of the game of cricket, the game which we can call the game of glorious uncertainties. But one thing I know for certain is that the Barbados Cadet Corps is 120 not out, as this evening's theme suggests. 120 years of existence and 120 years of a fantastic organization. And ladies and gentlemen, if we are proud of that, let's give ourselves a round of applause for such. And at this time, I'd like to give way to the official remarks, and I invite the Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps, Commander David Dorridge.
Thank you, Master of Ceremonies. 120 years ago, Barbados Cadet Corps was established. 50 years ago, we admitted females into the Barbados Regiment. 50 years ago, we admitted females into the Barbados Cadet Corps. 50 years ago, the Barbados Coast Guard Service was established. 45 years ago, the Barbados Defense Force was established. This year is a celebratory and a storied year. Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Lovell, Chief of Staff, Commander Mark Peterson, Staff Advisor to the Chief of Staff, Major Julia Dabreo, Commanding Officer, Barbados Regiment, Commanding Officer, Acting Barbados Coast Guard, Commander Rochford, Force Sergeant Major, other warrant officers, Colonel Errol Brathwaite, Commanding Officer, Commandant of the Cayman Islands Cadet Corps, Deputy Commandant, Cadet Executive Officer, Reverend Willoughby, former Commandants of the Barbados Cadet Corps, other senior officers of the Barbados Cadet Corps and the Barbados Defense Force, warrant officers, senior NCOs, specially invited guests, cadets, members of the media, good evening. A heartfelt welcome to each of you, especially our specially invited guests and guest speaker, Colonel Brathwaite. It is my immense pleasure on behalf of the Chief of Staff, Barbados Defense Force, to extend a warm and hearty welcome to each of you gathered here this evening. As we continue in celebration of the 45th anniversary of the establishment of the Barbados Defense Force, and indeed the 120th anniversary of the Barbados Cadet Corps, and it's interesting that for once the child is younger than the parent. Of course, the Barbados Cadet Corps being a formal and well-regulated and highly disciplined organization operating within all sectors of the schools, youth communities, colleges, polytechnics on this island, intends to continue the good work done throughout the years. This year, we have been highlighting and staging a number of celebratory activities. The Barbados Cadet Corps continues to take its awesome responsibilities very seriously, as we recognize that only serious and continual efforts are required as we approach perfection. Of course, we seek to transform the young girls and boys into becoming well-rounded and respectable citizens and ultimately leaders of their own right. To understand this awesome responsibility, we must therefore take a moment to appreciate the journey that has brought us thus far. The hard work, the dedication, and the passion that have been poured into the development of this noteworthy organization throughout the years is going to be highlighted during the course of this evening's lecture. We, together with the support of the important linkages such as parents, the school, by extension, the Ministry of Education, engage in shaping the minds of young individuals so that they understand their purpose and are able to recognize the various gifts that each of them possesses. It is therefore with great pride that we tonight are pleased to especially welcome tonight's presenter, a son of the soil, a former cadet, a former commandant of this organization. We invite him to deliver this very important lecture. He is an example of many others whom some of you may know who have risen from the Corps to become significant members of our society today. I trust during the course of his presentation that you will not just hear of the events, the chronological happenings over the last 120 years, but you will listen carefully so that you go away with the ethos, why things were done, how were things done, how are we affected by what happened in the past. We thank you all for honoring us with your presence this evening, and we hope that the information that you will receive will certainly provide enough evidence to confirm the utility of the Barbados Cadet Corps, which has a proud history of being the oldest continuous cadet movement in the Caribbean. As we progress through the evening and the lecture, when opportunity is presented, I encourage you to ask as many questions on the topic as you wish. Thank you once again for being here. We hope that you will have a wonderful time, and when you leave tonight, you will have that feeling of being more elucidated in the contribution made by the Barbados Cadet Corps to the development of the Barbados Defense Force. Let us all, as we have done just now, remember to give thanks to the Almighty God for his many blessings towards us and throughout these challenging years. With that, welcome to tonight's lecture, and I trust you will have an enjoyable time.
Thank you, Commander Dorridge. Ladies and gentlemen, the highly anticipated moment we've been waiting for to hear from our esteemed featured speaker. Colonel Brathwaite was appointed Commandant of the Cayman Islands Cadet Corps in 2022. Prior to this role, he served as Deputy Commandant and Acting Commandant. Before his tenure in the Cayman Islands, he was the Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps from 2016 to 2020. Beginning his career in education in 1992, Colonel Brathwaite worked his way up from teacher to head of department and senior teacher, eventually becoming principal of the Ellerslie School in Barbados, a position he held from 2011 to 2020. He holds a master's degree in history and philosophy, a bachelor's in fine arts, a postgraduate diploma in education, distinction, a certificate in educational management and administration, certificate in multi-agency goal command management, strategic leadership, and a certificate in international leadership and management level 3. He completed his master's thesis on the origins and evolution of the military landscape of Barbados with its implications for present-day usage. Colonel Brathwaite has also presented a number of other academic papers, including Teachers' Perception of Student Violence and Its Impact on School Culture in a Newer Secondary School, the development of education in post-emancipation Barbados. The journey has impacted by the church 1840 to 1940, and the contribution of blacks to the Great War, presented at the World War I Symposium, remembering muted voices in Kansas City, Missouri, USA. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our featured speaker, Colonel Errol Brathwaite.
Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Lovell, Chief of Staff, Acting, Barbados Defense Force. Commander Mark Peterson, Staff Advisor to the Chief of Staff of the BDF. Commander David Dorridge, Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps. Major Julia Dabrio, Commanding Officer of the Barbados Regiment. Lieutenant Commander Graham Rochford, Commanding Officer Acting, Barbados Coast Guard. Commander Carol Farley, Deputy Commandant, Barbados Cadet Corps, and Major Alfred Taylor, Cadet Executive Officer, Barbados Cadet Corps. Former Commandants and CEOs of the Barbados Cadet Corps, Reverend Esther Willoughby, Chaplain of the Barbados Cadet Corps, representatives from the national youth organizations, and colleagues from the academic faculty, University of the West Indies, representatives from the Ex-Cadets Association, officers, warrant officers, enlisted ranks, both serving and retired, other specially invited guests, cadets, members of the media. Good evening. It is indeed an honor to have been extended an invitation to be here, to join in the celebration of the 47th anniversary of 45th, my apologies, anniversary of the Barbados Defense Force, and indeed 120 of the Barbados Cadet Corps not out. I want to say before I begin that there's so much information as it relates to the history of the Barbados Cadet Corps that I can go on and on and on for a very long time. But as you know, the military takes its pride on precision, and given a particular period of time, I'll do my effort best to ensure that I do not overstep my bounds in fear of being asked to leave the podium. Having said that, I also want to make the point that we've all perhaps engaged in the history of the military, the history of the Cadet Corps, So what I present to you this evening is simply my perspective based on the research which I have done, not only for this lecture, but as you've heard, I've done significant research on the military landscape of Barbados, with a specific focus on the fortification of Barbados. I've also ventured to deliver a lecture on the contribution of West Indians to the Great War, World War I. And in all of that, all of those deliveries, the Cadet Corps featured prominently. So I want to engage you this evening, and I've put 3 questions on the board, and I want to challenge you to challenge me that by the end of my brief delivery that I've been able to respond to these questions so posed. Was the Barbados Cadet Corps started as a standalone unit? That's the first question. What led to the formation of the Barbados Cadet Corps in the first place? And my third question, to what extent has the Barbados Cadet Corps contributed to national youth development, or indeed national development as a whole? So as I speak, I want you to bear those questions in mind. So, general introduction. We're looking at the history of the Barbados Cadet Corps, which we are aware, or which from our research was started in 1904. In some of your research, some of my research, we see that at the law school, the Cadet Corps was started back in 1903. In reading Dr. Alverson Downs' research, Boys of the Empire, he speaks to physical drills being conducted in 1899 at the Commemorative School. So there was a lot of play leading up to 1904, and we all perhaps agree that this is the start date of the Barbados Cadet Corps. This is why we're here celebrating 120 not out. We also know that in 1978, at Ellerslie Secondary School, which was perhaps called Ellerslie Comprehensive at that time, which is now known as the Ellerslie School, that the number 4 cadet company was established. You may or may not have seen the crest, the Barbados Volunteer Force, the Barbados Regiment, and of course at the bottom you have the crest of the 3 first cadet companies to be established. This is significant because this supports my position that, and in relating to my first question, that when the Barbados Cadet Corps was formed in 1904, it wasn't formed as a standalone, but it was formed as a part of a bigger organization called the Barbados Volunteer Force. I want to repeat that. When it was formed in 1904, based on my research, it wasn't as a standalone, but rather as a part of a bigger organization called the Barbados Volunteer Force. Why do I declare this? We hear a lot about the name of a man called Captain Radcliffe, R. Radcliffe Hall, science teacher at the Lodge School, who was a captain in the Barbados Volunteer Force, as were the other individuals responsible for the cadets at Harrison College and at Commemorative. It is important to know and understand and remember what was happening in Barbados at that time, as far as education was concerned. I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Barbados was developed as a sugarcane economy. It was hard work. School and education at that time was not really a priority, but rather supporting the family. And as it is today, where there's compulsory education up until you have attained the age of 16, such was not the case back then. And in fact, it was an expensive undertaking to attend armed school at that time. Major Clark, I didn't even recognize you there. So, I want you to understand what was happening. The attendance was poor. The attendance at school was very, very poor. Why was it poor? Because many of those youngsters who were school age were also at the age that they needed to go and work in the fields. So it was a balance. The attendance, based on my research, was maybe about 55-60% at most times. So, the name Radcliffe Hall, significant to the history of the Barbados Cadet Corps. He was the first OC of the Cadet Corps. I've heard he was the first Commandant. I do not know that at that time that the term Commandant was being used, but rather OC. That further suggests to me that the Cadet Corps was formed as a part of a bigger organization called the Barbados Volunteer Force. I hope I'm making the point by saying that I believe it was part of a bigger organization. I have never, in all of my research, all that I have read from persons who have done research, I have not seen any regulations speaking to the formation of the Barbados Cadet Corps as a separate entity. So, 120 not out. We've claimed for several years that the Barbados Cadet Corps was indeed the oldest cadet corps in the region. I've discovered recently in a writing from former. So before I jump to that, I want you to have a look at this photograph to understand that At the law school, when the Cadet Corps was formed, I want you to look, I took a lot of time. This was really a black and white image. It was a black and white image, but because of something called AI, I was able to have some rendering done just to confirm something very important. When I was a young cadet, I always walk around and said to people, you know, we are part of an elite organization. Yes, not knowing what that meant. But I want you to look at this photograph and see if you can come up with that understanding that I have come up with when it was said that the Cadet Corps was an elite organization, what that meant. It was not an organization for people I don't want to get myself in any trouble, but you know, there are people who believe that, a group of people believe that history should remain in the past. But, you know, it is important for us to understand where we have come from. All right, is the point made? You not only had to be of a particular tone, you needed to have the financial means because you had to pay for the uniform. Not everybody could afford that. And there are some parents who could, but then you join the cadets at 12 years old, and by the time you reach 14 or 15, it was a waste of time because the uniform couldn't fit you anymore. An issue which I think we still are faced with here in Barbados and across the region in terms of the growth of our youngsters. So that point is made. Radcliffe Hall was a science teacher. And note the spelling, R-A-D-C-L-Y-F-F-E and not C-L-I, as I've seen in every other document that I've researched on the history of the Cadet Corps. Radcliffe, I've found a document with his signature, so I'm correcting the wrongs that have perhaps been written, unless somebody brings some other information to me. Okay. So, former president of Guyana, in the Starbuck News, Guyana wrote on the 12th of July 2009 that cadets were established in Guyana some 15 years before we had cadets here in Barbados. In fact, when Barbados celebrated its 50th anniversary, I was summoned to the games room at the officers' mess by the said president, who said to me, look, I want to get the Cadet Corps started again in Guyana. But that's quite all right. It is okay for this information indicating that we were not the first to start. I've got to do some more digging. Maybe I've got to take a trip to the archives in Guyana at some point. But the point remains that Guyana, they were out at some period. They were out. And Barbados, 120 not out. That is significant. You were ahead of the game, but at some point, you pull a hamstring and you had to pull up. While Barbados just continued along the journey. Yeah? Okay. So, I found this to be very, very interesting, right? So there's another document that I did not include that speaks to the Volunteer Act 1901 and when it was revised 4 or 5 years after. And what does it say here? The local forces in Barbados consist of the following military forces: the Barbados Volunteer Force, the Cadet Corps, the Barbados Rifle Association, the Barbados Police Force. The police force is not liable for military service. What does that say? It suggests to me that as a member of the Cadet Corps, that you were perhaps liable for military service. Not perhaps, that's what it says. Is that what you're getting from it? Or am I totally off? It also suggests to me that no one teacher in a school couldn't just go and form a cadet company as a standalone. So when I read that the Barbados Cadet Corps became affiliated with the Barbados Volunteer Force in 1907, somebody isn't getting it right. If you're going to Harrison College, if you're going to the Lodge School, if you're going to Commemorative, you're going to see some tablets with those individuals who would have, after graduating from being cadets, served started for World War I all over the world, Palestine, and you know, and it is important that you also know that there was, just going to digress a little bit, the Barbados West India Regiment and the Barbados West Indies Regiment, two separate and distinct entities altogether. So, you know, lots of individuals who felt that they were fit for service, then they applied and attempted to travel to the UK to join up. They were told, no, we don't want you here. We do not want you here. So that's why the Barbados West India Regiment was formed. Eventually, after they overcome that, they got over to the UK. When they thought that they were going out there to be on the front line, that was not the case initially. Many of them found themselves recovering shells that had not gone off. They found themselves digging latrines. They found themselves being paid less than fellas the opposite color of my shirt. That was the type of treatment that was received. And when we talk about the development of a nation and the impact of the Cadet Corps, because of the treatment, when most of those guys came back, it led to the development of, it was a very important part of the development of trade unionism, because it was a fight for their rights and to be treated as equals. So initially, whether the idea was to train up people for military service or not, that is what ended up happening. But there was a problem with discipline in our schools. There was a problem with leadership in our schools. And the whole thing that we go into schools now, we see a group of people called prefects and all these kind of things. The Cadet Corps is where it all started. the whole idea of leadership. That was one of the primary reasons for the formation of the Cadet Corps. Discipline at a time when the state was spending lots of money on reform school for boys. Have we gone full circle? I think that we solved that problem of discipline back then through the Cadet Corps. We've got to consider whether or not we don't need to take a second look or third look at the Cadet Corps to see how we can jump in there to assist the nation in solving an issue. But I know it will have some implications which the command of the Defense Force will have to discuss. And I want to be very close when that discussion is happening. Because no matter where I am across the world, I think that the problems are the same or sometimes even worse. Yeah? Okay. So, you see, the first OC of the Cadet Corps was not only a teacher of science, but look at what else he did. He was a fairly influential fella in Barbados. Look at what he was doing. Huh? That's what made the money, the big dollars coming in to Barbados. Until some place in the US decided that they were going to produce sugar cane. So I've looked at all of the data, and I've created what I believe the org chart of the Barbados Volunteer Force looked like back then. And I've placed the Cadet Corps as an entity under the Barbados Volunteer Force. This is just my assessment based on my understanding of how military establishments work. The Barbados Cadet Corps had to fall somewhere. It is an organization that was also supported heavily by Governor Hudson at the time. I don't see an individual teacher or member of a volunteer force leapfrogging over the command of the force and say, look, whether you like it or not, you form some cadets down here. And you give me some uniforms, and you give me some carabines, and the governor going to write to the UK and get some dual purpose weapons, unless you're part of that structure. You see? All right. So, this chap, Thomas Evans, one principal of the Lodge School, I mentioned it because I think it is significant, and I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on it. But what he did, there was a fellow called Sam Headley, who was one of the first students of color at this institution and a cadet. And so sharp and disciplined was Sam Headley that this principal decided he made a black fella head boy. I'm going to make a black fella head boy at the law school. Who tell he to do that? All of the prefects and so on decide, no, it's not going to happen, Mr. Principal. No black fella. So in his infinite wisdom, the principal said, okay, all of you are no longer prefects. Out goes you. Headley remains. So we are talking about change, a change in dynamic, change in society. racism, elitism, breakdown of these things through your discipline as a cadet. I was able to capture this photo. I'm sure that there are better photos, but this is a photo of Major Sam Headley, who eventually became PSDS. I can go on and on and on about Sam Headley, and had great responsibility for the formation of the Barbados Coast Guard, for those of you who did not know that. This man, with that funny looking hat that he never left home without. So, of course, the Ellerslie Secondary School at the time, the principal, a man called Cuthbert Brathwaite, who has a son who served in the Barbados Defense Force, one Major Brathwaite. This gentleman here led the charge along with a number of teachers on staff at the time. And you had some individuals from the Barbados Regiment who said, look, we want to work with the newly formed group of cadets at Ellerslie in the person of Corporal Randolph Bourne at the time and Woman Corporal Prestine Sobers, are now deceased. It was the first time that the cadets turned out in this uniform. No blue stripe. That's full khaki. I work with a lot of Jamaicans who tell me it's called khaki or something like that. Tell the khaki. They did not follow the same program. It was an experimental company, so they did not follow the same program. Kinesthetics, which was one of the things, earlier practice, firefighting, first aid. But of course, who am I? There's a fella here called, did I see John Walker here? Oh, Randy Charles. He was part of that group. Welcome. I'm not going to talk too much about that because he might want to say, might want to challenge me. But this was a significant turning point in the history of the Cadet Corps. What was happening at that time? Education in Barbados was expanding into these newer secondary schools. There were lots of children all over the schools. Ellerslie at that time had maybe about 1,800 students. St. Leonard's boys had about 2,200 students. And of course, I've been able to eyeball the admin instruction for that pass-out parade in 1978, 23rd of July, signed by F.E. Gittins, Lieutenant, Staff Officer, Barbados Regiment. This is a significant piece of information, Commandant, which I will make sure you have in your hands. So, in 2004, the Barbados Cadet Corps celebrated 100 years of existence. And these fine officers that you see here in this photograph, we've lost about 5 of them who've gone on to the great beyond. But they have given yeoman service. How did we come to a set of blue berets? We came this way because there were a number of individuals, a number of former cadets who did not want to put back on the uniform or who did not want to be a soldier, quote unquote. What did that mean? That with the numbers expanding, the level of supervision had to be taken seriously. And so the Chief of Staff at the time, Brigadier Rudyard Lewis, looking at what the Defense Act, Cap 159 says, engaged the Defense Board, and an agreement was made to have, in 1984, a group of officers who will serve exclusively as officers commanding the Barbados Cadet Corps companies. We have among us, I recognize Colonel Bradshaw, who was an 84er. We have Commander Farley, who was an 84er. Mother, you're the 85er. Huh? You're junior, man. Look, these gentlemen have given yeoman service to the Barbados Cadet Corps to ensure that we continued batting strong. 120, or West Indies, I mean, we just won a series against South Africa. But that has not been the norm. We haven't been batting that strong. Yeah? And you know what is important? The sustainability. I remember as a young lad, Colonel Bradshaw testing me for my reading. I challenge him at every opportunity I get. And he challenges me, but that, you know, you guys train me. So if I challenge you, and that would be the case, I was told, former CEO, now deceased, you make sure that when you train, that person becomes better than you. The person you train should be better than you. I believe in that philosophy. So, of course, with the introduction or the establishment of this group of officers, it created some issues across the board. And in 2007, I think that the Defense Force under Colonel Quinton sought to deal with that and to regularize the officers working with the Cadet Corps, which to me, that was a very, very important decision. So in 2007, where fellas had a Defense Board commission or letter of appointment and all sorts of things, then you now felt as though you were part of an organization with a long history. So what is it really in terms of youth development or national development that we focus on? Whether we need to step back and engage to reflect on whether we are doing the things that we say we are going to do or that we have set out to do. Have we achieved? Have we been achieving? Do we need to reflect, take a pace back? Bearing in mind that irrespective of what is said, the Barbados Cadet Corps continues to be what I consider the leading cadet corps across the region. I will tell you that I will challenge Barbados from where I am. We'll see what the result looks like, but a challenge nonetheless. But as having gone over to the Cayman Islands and, having taken over as commandant of that very fine organization, I still continue to work closely with Barbados because that guidance for an organization like the Cayman Islands, which is 22 years old, there's a lot of guidance that is still required. And there's a lot of guidance that we still get from Barbados. Only last month, had one captain here on secondment agreed by the Defense Force and consented by the Commandant and the CEO to work along to build capacity. And I thank the organization for that. What I'm saying to you is that I've grown up here in the Barbados Cadet Corps and the Barbados Defense Force. I'm now operating and I'm doing some fantastic things in the Cayman Islands. A man from the cadets in the Cayman Islands as commandant. We've got another commandant from Barbados who is in the British Virgin Islands. That can't be said about, I don't know who else we can say that about. All right? So the work, not only development locally, but regionally, and of course, internationally. Important work. I did some chopping and changing, and I believe that we all have a responsibility to ensure that when we move on, we've left some individuals, we've motivated people to be a part of the organization that we have benefited so much from. So those 6 there in the green are all Elizonians who we've marshaled in the right place and who are now, I believe, and I hope, are giving good service to the Barbados Defense Force. All others, the men there except one in that photo, although I've spent more time at LSD than all of them. Okay. So, I know you've seen all sorts of photographs. Do we recognize anybody in these images here? Force, you see yourself? Look at him here, look. He is homegrown through the Cadet Corps into the force to continue his service. Anybody recognize this chap here? A fella called Neil Matthews. You wouldn't recognize him at all, innit? maybe it's the beard, I don't know. Adrian Matt, T-shirt, Lester Vaughn, Patty Weir, I think she may still be in the band. She's not, okay. This fellow, Robin Seal, I think he went off to join the U.S. Yeah, and this fellow Rock here from number 8. I think he was a lecturer at college or university or something like that. Of course, Adrian Clark here, who is now a petty officer in the Cayman Islands Coast Guard, doing a fantastic job. I recently begged the commander of the Coast Guard if I can borrow him to help out with some work, so he got to work hard. And of course, this fellow here, Ken White, who safe security. So I can go on and on and on. But I know my time is limited. 375th anniversary of Parliament, I think it was. Parade. And of course, community service. Community service. Young Maynard was a part of this, as too was young you know how I mean. Look, no retreat, no surrender. I want to repeat those words. No retreat, no surrender. And I'm saying 120 years. I know they were not his words originally, but I've borrowed them because that's what the organization must stand for in terms of excellence. So during one of the most difficult periods in the history of Barbados as a country, we heard a former cadet saying to the nation, no retreat, no surrender. And I'm talking about none other than former Minister of Health, Lieutenant Colonel Bostic, as we battled the COVID pandemic. One of us started as a cadet, saying to the nation, no retreat, no surrender. In 1979, problems in Grenada. And who led that operation? Former cadet, former Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defense Force, Brigadier Rudyard Lewis. No retreat, no surrender. Grammy Award winner, Lance Corporal Robin Fenty, aka Rihanna. No retreat, no surrender. Because once you set, you shouldn't they say, you put your MPA on your CZP? Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that I've been able to add some information on the occasion of the 45th anniversary of the Barbados Defense Force, and indeed the 120th anniversary of the Barbados Cadet Corps. And I also hope that I've been able to respond appropriately to the questions posed to you. I thank you for your attention. Please. Questions, queries, comments? Yes, sir. Sorry, Commandant. I saw a hand.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for an excellent lecture.
Thank you.
My name is Hallam Hope. I'm here representing the Nation newspaper. I noticed you mentioned some very famous individuals, like you mentioned a number of very famous individuals, but I want to get back to that hint that you started, and I believe as a Cormarian, I would like you to elaborate on that in terms of...
Up and on, people, come on.
Right.
It said that I'm an honorary Commemorian. I don't know why.
Okay. You mentioned you hinted at the problems we're having, challenges we're having with youth in Barbados, and you seem to be suggesting that there's a role for the Cadet Corps. Could you elaborate on that in some detail?
Yes, when the Barbados Cadet Corps was started, as I indicated, it was because, well, one of the reasons was because there were challenges in our schools with discipline. The establishment of the prefect system came about as a result of the formation of the Cadet Corps in Barbados. When the Edna Nichols Center was started in Barbados, one of the entities that was called upon to set up a program for those youngsters once they were sent to the Edna Nichols Center for their assessment and evaluation and get them involved in meaningful activities was the Barbados Defense Force and the Barbados Cadet Corps. And so, when the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps was started, same approach. I remember, and Major Clark can support me, there was a fellow now deceased called Victor Bovell, Sergeant Major Bovell. He was extracted, and he was one of the key individuals at that institution. There was a fellow called Carl Podmore that we know as Alf, former cadet as well. He also played an important, yes, indeed. Yes, a very important part in that. And so my suggestion is that we need, before I say that, the Ministry of Education, there was a committee responsible for discipline. You may not know, but the cadet executive officer sat on that committee to help advise the ministry on perhaps solutions to treat to some of the challenges. So I am again suggesting it may call for some additional training and maybe a special group of individuals. Perhaps a good place to look would be the Cadet Corps, because you have an influence of teachers who serve as officers with the cadets, who can be trained to assist with intervention strategies for the challenges that we are having. I also want to make the point that maybe right now, 70 or 80% of the leadership of the schools in Barbados are either officers serving with the Cadet Corps or former officers of the Cadet Corps or the Barbados Defense Force, starting with Harrison College. Miss Kaylin Kelman-Holder, she was an officer with the cadets. Number 3, Miss Beckles, she was an officer with the Cadet Corps. I think she's an 86er. Former principal of Harrison College, Juanita Wade. She was an officer. Major Springer, Frederick Smith, Parkinson Memorial, Captain Ward, St. Leonard's Boys, Peter Cox, he was an officer. Number 13, Mr. Stephen Jackman, he was a cadet at the law school. Graydon Seeley, the deputy principal, he's an officer with the cadets. Grantley Adams Memorial, Major Skeet, he was an officer with the cadets, with the regiment. He was a cadet at the law school. Could I continue? Lester Vaughan, Miss Suzette Clark, she was a cadet. She was Harrison College or Commemorative? All right. I'm going to get my facts straight. So, the point is, Dayton Griffith, Major Boy Smile, you can't hide in your striped shirt. He is an officer with the cadets. So the Cadet Corps and the Defense Force is well poised, if ever before, to assist with a problem. But we've got to sit down. We've got to do a surgical analysis and get to the root cause and then come up with solutions. We can't take a piecemeal approach. We cannot take a piecemeal approach. While we do this, we've got to make sure that what we do as members of the Defense Force is above board. I don't care who you are or where you go. The model here in Barbados, the recruitment of persons to work with cadets, I'm following the right model. So somebody told me years ago, you got to throw the baby with the bath water. If you have to do that, then you have to do that. Because when parents and guardians who are our key stakeholders repose trust in us to look after their children, we've got to ensure that the policies are in place and the right people are in place. So if you do not meet the grade, I'm sorry. I am very passionate about the Cadet Corps and about the military, and sometimes we don't agree, but we don't have to agree. That lends for good discussion. I hope I've responded, sir, to your question. Thank you.
Good night, sir. Sub-Lieutenant Marshall here.
Good night.
Follow-up question. Based on what the gentleman before me said, given that we're now operating 120 years later, still experiencing disciplinary issues, but as we can imagine, the discipline or lack thereof may stem from different issues now. Has any thought been given to perhaps partnership with Child Care Board, Barbados, to maybe find or develop innovative ways of treating to the issues?
The answer to that is yes, perhaps not to the extent that we need to do it to. But I remember maybe in 2017, that instruction came down from the Chief of Staff at the time, who said that all persons working with cadets need to engage in the appropriate training, and that was done through our partners at the Child Care Board. And we've got to continue. We've got to continue with that. We've got to do it every 2 or 3 years. We've got to train and retrain. Darkness to light training. If you've got to do a declaration, personal declaration, we got to make sure that it is done. Because across the region, with cadetting, we've got to make sure. Remember, we will send our youngsters from Barbados to some other place, which is why at the level of the commandants, we've got to make sure that we've dotted our I's and we've crossed our T's so that we are comfortable, because we're not operating in a bubble. It is a global community. We know that Barbados is now part of the International Sea Cadet Association, engaging cadets from across the length and breadth of the globe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, I am very happy you yourself, a former cadet, who've taken the opportunity to continue serving at this level. Commandant.
Colonel Brathwaite, thank you very much for your presentation. 45 years, Barbados Defense Force. And when Barbados Defense Force started, it drew for its leadership, its future leadership, directly from the Cadet Corps. So the types of the Willie Parises, Jeffrey Bosticks, and others. Oh, yeah. And Dave Durridge and the others were plucked from the Cadet Corps and sent off to lands far and away to train, etc., to come back to make a contribution. Now, can you tell me what happened before 1979? Is there any evidence to show how officers in the Barbados Regiment came about? Did they come directly out of the Cadet Corps, or is it the other way, like Ratcliffe Hall and others were members of the Volunteer Force, Barbados Regiment, and commanded the Cadet Corps? In other words, did it go as it goes now from cadets to the force, or did it come the other way?
I think that it kind of went the other way. Many people may not know that Barbados at the time, Barbados was the hub of military activity in the region. Not only infantry, but you had horseback, cavalry, if that's the correct term, on the garrison. And that kind of faded away because of lack of interest. Yeah. There was some point that the hub started a transition to Antigua, but Barbados still held on to significant influence. And they requested some support in terms of equipment from Barbados, and Barbados told them no. Yeah. The whole garrison, historic area, at some point, Colonel, Commander, there were some plans for the development of St. Anne's Fort and also for inland forts. I may be the only person who have access to those plans locally, except you go to the British Library. And I think that maybe I need to do some work to ensure that those things are published so that they can be made available to all and sundry. But to your point, Commandant, I think that it went the other way before 79. Maybe the journey started to change prior to that, because there's some other individuals that I have not mentioned by virtue of the limited time that I have to present. But, yeah.
Good evening, sir. First, I'm not a military person, so I will keep myself in my lane, so to speak. I want to congratulate you on your presentation this evening, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But in my lane, I will also give you a fairly good grade. I'm going to encourage you, as you were seeking this information all over the place. One of the things that happens in this country is that many people don't write. Mm-hmm. So I'm therefore encouraging you to chronicle your research so you can better share it with the people of Barbados. Because, as you said, the cadet is a very important institution in this country. And we need to highlight these institutions and preserve our history. So I'm encouraging you to put it together so you can share it with all of us. And the point about the cadets and its place in helping to in terms of providing discipline, especially in times like 120 years ago, but as someone like yourself who has done a little history, we know that these things happen. There's nothing new. And I believe that the Cadet Corps can help us in this situation. And I think Barbados is ready. And I believe I've said this to you. In fact, I think we were ready for it a while ago. That Barbados needs to have not just an institution or an organization for our youth where occasionally your parents send you to, or somebody encourages you to go. I think it's about time that we commandeer some of these people off the streets. I think it's about time. And I will take my leave at this point. And I will hear from you. Take care. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Doc. You've got to listen when the academics from the university speak, and I think everybody heard your voice. I thank you for your submission and for your comments. Thank you very much.
Hi, sir. Captain Wallace here. Just to expand on the point regarding the possible reason why Guyana had stopped their cadets. Immediately, I'm thinking of the 1970s with the political tension between Jagan and Burnham, what was going on there in Guyana. And it may be possible that the cadets were stopped as a precautionary measure to discourage young people from being brought in to the two parties with the training that they would have had, because as you know, young people are more easily influenced than adults.
Yeah, thank you, Captain Wallace. Yes, absolutely correct. And even this is about 7 or 8 years that they've restarted, and the use of weapons is no longer a part of their curriculum. Yeah, thank you for that.
Pleasant good evening. Thank you very much, Colonel Brathwaite, for your very inspiring presentation. I have 2 questions. One is on the point of history. We did mention that the law school was the first cadet company in Barbados, but you did not mention here the cheese and ahs and so on. I never identified myself. You never mentioned, though, how law school went from number 1 to number 2. All right, so that is something if you wish to expand on. But my second point, from where you sit now, the Honorable Prime Minister is very keen on youth development. And I believe up to a few weeks ago, she reiterated her priorities for youth development. And the Barbados Cadet Corps is that institution for her. As you may be aware, the Cadet Corps is the only arm of the Barbados Defense Force that received a significant increase in estimates of expenditure based on the various programs that they wish to implement. But the challenge that they have here, very set, is twofold, and you touched on it earlier when the officers of the Corps were regularized, which I do agree was an excellent point. But the concern is that there are second and third order effects of that decision, which is now hampering the growth of the Barbados Cadet Corps. The PM specifically said she wishes to expand exponentially the Barbados Cadet Corps, but you need that direct supervision. Now, for an officer assigned to the Corps, remember the Defense Act says that only officers of the Defense Force can train cadets. To enter into that baseline, there's a process. That process, in my view, turns off the school teachers that you wish to have, other members of society who wish to come and give back to the Barbados Cadet Corps. It prohibits that sharp CEO or CSUO from transitioning from today you end school at camp, and then tomorrow you enter, as was done in the past, you put on your PCO, show the flashes on your blue beret, and you continue to grow and develop the Cadet Corps. How do we balance? It's a wicked problem. We've discussed it at our level. We've discussed it with the Commandant. We came to some very heated words. I recall the Chief of Staff had to broker myself for Commander Durridge. But how do we balance meeting that military, a basic military benchmark to develop officers assigned to the Corps and still expand to meet the PM's intent? So just 2 questions there for you. 2 very easy questions, I believe. Thank you.
That's what you call a curveball. So, you know, Commander, I thought it was quite clear when I dealt with your first question to indicate that based on my research, I've even provided the chart, or what I felt was a good possible R chart to show that the Cadet Corps was perhaps not started at an individual school, but rather as a part of the volunteer force. So even though there's a lot of discussion about Lodge having been the first school to have a cadet thing, I think when the Cadet Corps was formed under the Volunteer Act, numbers were assigned. That, based on my research, would be my response to your question. But we can continue our discussion thereafter, right? All right. So to your second question, which is a very, very important one, I think people have got to make that decision. Do you want to be a part of the organization, or do you not want to be a part of the organization? So if you want to, you know, I remember when I completed the potential officers course, the Chief of Staff acting at the time, Dr. Maynard, Colonel Maynard said, and I will never forget the words. He said, it's one thing to put on the uniform or walk around and look pretty. Anybody can do that. But it's when you get out there and do the rigorous training, that is what makes the difference. So we've got to look at the structure of the Cadet Corps and determine the extent to which we want to continue with just having teachers come in as officers who want to be weekend warriors or whatever, or whether we want to put people who are serious about this, developing the young people of Barbados. Maybe you can have 2 branches. I don't see anything wrong with that. But we need to, and I've said to the Commandant, I've said to the CEO, we need to relook at the structure of the organization. I think the time has come that the Commandant sits at the headquarters in a full-time capacity and focus on the strategic direction of the Cadet Corps so that the command of the force does not have to be pulling out. It's here trying to say, this is it. Supported by the executive officer, which when we transition from staff officer to CEO was perhaps based on that same, your question. We transitioned from staff officer cadets to CEO because it was a move to kind of civilianize, if you will, the organization. Should we continue with that concept out of the UK, or should we move to a new direction? And I do understand that the Honorable Prime Minister, I think that I know when the Sea Cadets were started, she was very keen on that, and she put her money where her mouth is. And I know a couple of years ago, when the Honorable Prime Minister said, let's increase the Sea Cadets, I made a suggestion. I said, look, we can have only so many because of facilities, the infrastructure, full-time, but let's have a hybrid. So that every school should have 10 or 15 or 20 cadets who are part of that school, but they're also part of the Sea Cadet program, and they benefit. And that gives them the opportunity to choose which direction they want to go even more because they're exposed to a lot more activity. So I hope I've responded, but we can continue to discuss. You're a very good point. Perhaps we need to put some heads together and make some serious decisions on that, but very, very important, which will impact not only Barbados, but whatever is happening across the globe. And I continue to make the point that the Barbados Cadet Corps is looked on. In the Cayman Islands, a fantastic model, which I think Barbados can also borrow from. Strategic direction. So no longer luck and choice. So we developed a number of MOUs. One with the Coast Guard, Fire Service. I moved next to the police service, the prison service, and I have youngsters who will shadow so that if they want to transition into the uniform entities, when they leave, then that mentorship is there. Perhaps it's something that we need to have that discussion on in Barbados. Yes, sir.
Okay, good evening, sir. Stephen Smith, Chair of the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award. And in response to a question from Mr. Hope as to how the Cadet Corps is influencing Barbados society and working with the youth. Now, I cannot speak for the Cadet Corps, but I could make it known that the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award does have an arrangement with the Cadet Corps in Barbados through a sub-licensing agreement. It was looked at, we had discussions with the Ministry of Youth some years ago and with the Cadet Corps, and it was quickly seen that there are synergies which existed between the Cadet Corps and the award program in terms of what we offer to the youth. The core of the award program is the youth of Barbados. Well, it's an international program, but the youth do community service, they learn skills, they do sports, and they learn to do adventurous journeys. Now, this is something that is already embedded in the Cadet Corps in terms of what they offer to the youth. So there are synergies there which were quickly recognized, and we then signed a memorandum of understanding and a sub-licensing agreement, in fact, with the Cadet Corps, so the Cadet Corps could actually offer the program autonomously within the Cadet Corps. And that is an arrangement that has worked very, very well. It certainly redounds to the young people of Barbados becoming more rounded citizens. And this is one of the ways in which the Cadet Corps is in fact impacting the youth of Barbados. The Duke of Edinburgh's International Award has been in Barbados for the past, I believe it's 64 years now, I believe we're at 64 years now. It is one of the oldest running youth programs. We're not as old as the Cadet Corps, but we certainly have a wealth of information and practice in terms of delivering these things to the youth of Barbados. And we are happy to work with the Barbados Cadet Corps in this regard to make better rounded citizens for young people. So this is one of the ways in which the Cadet Corps is in fact impacting young people in Barbados. And thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much for your submission. I defer a lot for the ears of the Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps, but I jump in to say to you, I remember a document called Dovetailing the Barbados Cadet Corps and the Duke of Edinburgh International Award. I'm not wearing my Gold Award badge, but I am a Gold Award holder, and I know that, yeah, thank you. And I vowed without permission, I wore my Gold Award on my uniform, deliberately so, because at a ceremony at Government House, none other than Prince Philip, the late Prince Philip, pinned that on. And I said, even if the brigadier tell me to take it off, it's not coming off. You understand? I tell you, sir, you know who pinned this on? I gave a lot of trouble as a young officer, though, right? But point well taken. I know that the Barbados Cadet Corps has or continues to be invested in the Duke of Edinburgh International Award, and I know that the Commandant has heard you, and I'm sure that action will follow because it is a significant program. In fact, we started some training in 1991. Following that, we took a group of officers to be trained as leaders and assessors to Trinidad, and that process continued. We did have one officer that we sent off on a course who came back and disappeared into the dark of the night, but that's only one person. Yeah? I was Commandant at the time, and I was not very pleased at all. But, you know, be that as it may, I think that the Cadet Corps will heed your call. Thank you very much.
Sir, final question. At 120 years for the Barbados Cadet Corps in existence, you would agree with me that the Cadet Corps has done exceptionally well over the years. But what I want to ask you is, what are your thoughts as it relates to the Cadet Corps transcending what it already offers to give cadets something after they have left cadets? I was fortunate to leave cadets with a level 3 CVQ. I don't know if that still happens, but do we want to transcend what we offer now to offer more to cadets after they have gone on to the world of work or whatever the case may be? So like small boat license for the Sea Cadets, Royal School of Music levels, licenses for the people in the band, those kind of things. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's an excellent question, and I want to respond by saying that, you know, some time ago, and I will tell you that the Commandant at the time was Colonel Bradshaw, who pushed it. And at the time also, the Defense Force became a center, a CVQ center. It got authorization. We developed a good program. I sat in a meeting in Jamaica last year, and one of the staff officers said, "Oh, we started this CVQ program, X, Y, and Z," and so on. I gave her a look. I said, you know, it was starting in Barbados first. Because they don't play around with certain things. There were some things about the use of certain equipment in the program. Former command of the Defense Force said, look, let's shut down the program. We've now got to pick it up, polish it off, and get cracking. Because it is one thing to be walking around doing all these excellent activities, the Duke of Edinburgh International Award, CVQ in whatever. Persons can leave with a level of certification that can ensure that they have that foundation for employability once they graduate from the Cadet Corps, in addition to the discipline and so on that they benefit from as members of the cadets. So I think excellent opportunity, excellent idea. We've got to dust off, command, force. We've got to, Commandant, the CVQ must be started back. I think we've done a bit of a disservice to the organization having stopped it. You know, that also inspired me to introduce a number of CVQs when I served at Ellerslie, commercial food preparation and cookery. I stole a teacher from one school to run that program. I'm not ashamed to say that. You've got to set the stage for success. Yeah? I saw her here walking around somewhere. I'm not going to call her name. But we've got all these schools that we've got access to. Maybe we've got to have a different discussion with the principals of the secondary schools and say to them, look, this is what we are looking at doing. We've got to save our young people. Commander, those are the kind of things that will help us to solve some of the challenges, because not everybody needs to be in uniform. The whole concept of civilian instructors, once people are properly vetted and they've met the criteria, this is how we can expand that level of supervision, getting the youngsters to be qualified at various levels. Given that up to a few years ago, 60% of all students leaving secondary school were leaving without any form of certification whatsoever. The CVQ, the concept of CVQ, which I know the Ministry of Education spent significant funds on, was one of the answers to solving that issue. In discussion with the business community, they said, look, when a fellow completes a CXC, for example, in technical drawing, that's about a theoretical based qualification. But when they can do something like cabinet making, we can employ them right away because they're coming with the requisite skills, having built out their portfolio and so on. And we know that they're ready for the world of work. So the CVQs, very, very important. And of course, much of what they do, based on the area, can be claimed also as part of their JUPE activity as well. I think I've exhausted everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for the opportunity afforded to be here in Barbados on this very special occasion, and certainly to deliver a bit on the history of the Barbados Cadet Corps. I am humble. Thank you.
Well, adjustments are being made in this thing for historical reasons alone. One has to give credit to the November Award Barbados for the formation of the cadet unit, because they were at the heart of the formation of the cadet unit. Then, so Mr. Clark, who sat here very quietly, was in fact one of the founding members of the cadet unit in Barbados. He managed to convince the then Minister of Education, one, the other, that we maybe should expand the cadet unit. Here we are, some years later. So, the Commemorative Award and Mr. Clark, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Colonel Brathwaite, for that very superlative presentation. And at this time, we'll now have a presentation to you, sir, and I'd like to invite Cadet Under Officer Christian Seeley of the No. 12 Company, St. Leonard's Boys School, to make that presentation.
Good evening, sir. On behalf of the Barbados Cadet Corps, we'd like to present you with this token of appreciation. And we also like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to give us an interesting lecture on the history of the Barbados Cadet Corps. Thank you, sir. So this is a little more memorable. So present this as well, and it is a right. So this is in recognition of your contribution to the Barbados Defense Force 45th anniversary celebrations. This is a very important time of our careers as military in Barbados Cadet Corps. So thank you very much.
Thank you, CUO Seeley. That hereby concludes the presentation aspect of this evening, and I trust it was definitely enjoyed by all. We will now have our vote of thanks, which will be delivered by Major Rodney Millington. Sir?
Thank you so very much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. Ladies and gentlemen, good night. I am Major Rodney Millington, and it is my distinct honor to deliver the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Lovell, Chief of Staff Acting, Commander Mark Peterson, Staff Advisor to the Chief of Staff, Commander David Dowridge, Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps, Colonel Errol L. Brathwaite, Commandant of the Cayman Islands Cadet Corps and former Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps, Lieutenant Commander Graham Rochford, Commanding Officer of the Barbados Coast Guard, Acting, and Major Julia Dablio, Commanding Officer of the Barbados Regiment, Commander Carl Farley, Deputy Commandant of the Barbados Cadet Corps, Major Alfred Taylor, Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Cadet Corps, former Commandants Reverend Esther Willoughby, representatives of the National Youth Organizations, ex-cadets, fellow officers, warrant officers, and enlisted ranks, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good night. I would first like to start by extending a heartfelt thanks and appreciation to Reverend Esther Willoughby. Thank you for your opening prayer, which set the tone for this evening and reminded us the importance of unity, guidance, and the higher purpose that we all serve. Thank you very much, ma'am. A special thanks to the Master of Ceremonies, Lieutenant Coast Guard Crispin Hackett, for expertly guiding us through the proceedings with poise and professionalism. And indeed, we want to say a special thank you to you for doing an excellent job. We thank you. Special thanks is also extended to my Commandant, Commander David Dowridge, for welcoming us all this evening with your opening and welcoming remarks. And indeed, we felt awfully welcome as you came, and you really did an excellent job in that capacity. Thank you so much, sir. Colonel Errol L. Brathwaite, we want to thank you especially for delivering such a comprehensive and enlightening lecture on the history of the Barbados Cadet Corps and its invaluable contribution to national youth development. Your words have not only illuminated the past, but have also inspired us to continue fostering the spirit of discipline, leadership, and the service among our youth. We want to especially thank you for the nuggets that you have given us and some of the points that you've made in terms of ensuring that we understand that the Barbados Cadet Corps was not a standalone organization, but part of a larger organization called the Barbados Volunteer Force. And indeed, one of the points that you made so forcefully to us as well is that the Barbados Cadet Corps is an elite organization. And we want to thank you for that as well as we celebrate this 120th year. Special acknowledgement to the officers of the Barbados Regiment and the Barbados Coast Guard for your leadership and continued support of the Barbados Cadet Corps. Your presence here today signals the strong ties that bind our organization in service to our nation, and we want to thank you for your presence here as well. We are also grateful to Dr. Henderson Carter for your contribution and unwavering support to the Barbados Cadet Corps. Your efforts behind the scenes right, do not or did not go unnoticed, and we want to thank you for your contribution and commitment. To my fellow officers of the Barbados Cadet Corps who ushered us all in so gracefully and did such an excellent job, we want to thank you for ensuring the smooth running of today's event. To the 45th and 120th anniversary committees, we want to thank you for your dedication and meticulous planning, which has made this gathering a success. Our appreciation is also extended to the Solutions Center for facilitating this event at the historic 3W's venue that resonates deeply with our national pride and our heritage. To our patrons, members of the media, and each one of you, our esteemed guests, thank you for gracing us with your presence and your continued support to the Barbados Cadet Corps as we celebrate this milestone of 120 years, and indeed to the Barbados Defense Force, who also celebrates their 45th anniversary this year. Your involvement is critical to the success of our mission in shaping the leaders of tomorrow. Finally, on the behalf of the Barbados Cadet Corps and everyone involved, I thank you all for being here today. Your support is invaluable as we continue our journey to service, right? And service to our youth and to our nation. May we all here leave inspired and committed to furthering the ideals and values that have made the Barbados Cadet Corps a cornerstone of national development and for over 120 years. Thank you and a very good night as we continue this journey of proven excellence, shaping a promising future as we leave here this afternoon. A special good night to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Major Milliton, for the delivery of the vote of thanks and highlighting all who made this evening possible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings to an end the official aspect of this evening's proceedings. Lecture number 2 of this fantastic series of lectures. I trust that you would have soaked up all that would have said this evening, and I'm quite sure that you all are appreciative. Upcoming events, the Barbados Defense Force breakfast party called Therapy on the 14th of September, and the next lecture series will be on the 25th of September, hosted by the Barbados Coast Guard. We will now retire to enjoy some light refreshments and engage further during our mix and mingle. I'm Lieutenant Coast Guard Crispin Hackett, and it has been a pleasure to be your MC. Do have a good evening, and I now ask that we stand for the departure of our principal guests.
Building the nation since 1904, the Barbados Cadet Corps. We are the future for sure. The skills we learn as we serve with pride, good citizens will be. By land, by sea, in unity, instilling discipline and loyalty. The Barbados Cadet Corps, building the nation through generations. We are the future for sure. The Barbados Cadet Corps, building the nation since 1904. The Barbados Cadet Corps, we are the future for sure. The skills we learn as we serve with pride, good citizens will be. By land, by sea, in unity, instilling discipline and loyalty. The Barbados Cadet Corps, building the nation through generations. We are the future for sure.